I'm John Carroll. I'm the Chief Safari Guide at Leadership Safaris. I'm an ex-CEO, and what you're going to see on today's episode is, or hear and watch on today's episode, is an exploration of a little bit about my upbringing and background in Zimbabwe, plus how that led into my principles of leadership, self-led leadership, leadership as a service, and what that means in today's businesses when the world is changing. People want different things. How do we lead through that? And Prosper and I are going to be guiding you through that today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today, boy, we have a guest who's not just your ordinary entrepreneur. He's a leader, he's a storyteller, and a true champion of nature. Now, John, Magadin.
Magadi, how are you? Good to see you, Prosper.
I really wanted to say that because, we were just talking and we actually realized, well, had the years been, the same, we would have gone to the same schools and been in the same neighborhoods in Zimbabwe. Good on you for what you've done, sir.
Thank you. And I want to reciprocate that to you because, I've been watching what you've been doing, and I love your work, Prosper. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. You're creating such a big body of stuff. It's great. Really good.
Fantastic. And that concludes our episode. That's all we wanted today, John, for you to just...
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. All right. For those that are watching, hold on to your seats because I think this promises to be one of our best episodes yet. You see the men that we have in front of us. John Carroll is a true master storyteller, and he himself is a CEO, a former CEO and managing director who actually helps organizations to develop better business through better leadership. And how does he do that? By telling stories. Now, John is your leadership safari guide, and he's going to take us on a journey today from where he actually started and literally what he's doing to help others be, do, and have businesses out there that are profitable and enjoyable. Enjoyable in the fact that everybody who works in it is actually enjoying to come to work, not just because they're being forced to, but actually want to work in those businesses. And that's what good leadership is all about. So he is knowledgeable pretty much about wildlife, and that's the reason why he's written a book about lions, elephants, rhinos, and meerkats. Now, John, I could go on and talk about your accolades and everything else that you have come along with. First of all, tell the audience what I have in my hand here.
Okay, so Prosper, that's a book that I wrote and released in the middle of last year. It's called How the Lion Learned to Lead and Other Stories. And what it is, it's a series of African animal fables, and each fable addresses, I suppose, a certain aspect of leadership, my version of leadership. Well, it's not just mine, there are other people teaching this stuff as well, but what I believe is true leadership. And each animal, I've tried to relate each of the animals in each fable to a particular aspect of leadership. So the lion fable, which opens the book, and there's the main title of the book, How the Lion Learned to Lead. It's a fable about a young lion who is lacking self-confidence. He's got to take over from his dad as leader of the pride. But his dad is a very traditional, very autocratic leader. Same as what we've had in the past in our businesses. That's what's happened through the industrial era. That's how people led. You were a leader in a business. You told people what to do and made sure they got on with it. That's how it worked. So this young lion's lacking confidence because he's a kind, caring young lion. And he's developed enormous empathy, and that's how he wants to work. But because of that, he doesn't believe he can be a leader. Through the fable, he learns that in some ways, and very often, that can be a better way to lead. So the principles, there are 5 principles attached to each fable, and the principles for that fable, for example, come out in the book through the story. And then I summarize them at the end just so people really understand what they're about. And from there, it goes into a fable about a rhinoceros, and that's about self-leadership, because I really believe that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. why would anyone want to follow someone who doesn't know where they're going? So this is about a rhinoceros who's belligerent, he is aggressive, he stamps all over treads on other people, champs out other people's fires, is so egotistical, so arrogant because of his position of power, because he's big and strong. And the most powerful Nanga, which is, I suppose you could call, I don't like the term, but a witch doctor, a natural healer, traditional healer in Zimbabwe, you'd know that, basically gets the better of this rhinoceros and shows him why he's wrong. The rhinoceros doesn't learn too well, but that's that fable. And then it goes into a fable about some meerkats, and that's all about team building. I won't labor the point. Into a fable about elephants, and that's about developing a great corporate culture and engaged employees. Then into a fable about a leopard and how the leopard got its spots. And that is a fable about change and leading ongoing change. It's not change management. And I want to stress I believe there's a big difference between change management, which is a process that you go through to instill a particular change project, and change leadership. Change leadership, and I believe this is what's needed and where a lot of businesses make mistakes. Change leadership is about creating a culture of ongoing change within your business, within your organization. So the people in your organization understand that this is how we do things around here. We're constantly adapting. We're constantly looking for better ways to do things. That's the principle of it. And then, yes, the change management, the process to go through if you're implementing, I don't know, a new piece of software or something. Yes, that's necessary. But underpinning that, don't overlook creating a culture where people want to continually improve and drive that themselves ultimately. And then the sixth fable in the book is about a monkey, and it's about communication. It's about this monkey who just chatters all the time. And it's about how communication is as much about listening and then wanting to help as anything else. And that's a principle of communication in leadership. You're there to help other people. You're there to serve other people. So that's what the book's about. Yeah.
Fantastic, and thank you so much, because like I was telling you, I went through this book and I just really the 30 natural laws. They really showcase themselves as you read, and I think you've done this superbly. It's a very small book and people can read it in sort of one sitting. But John, you could have written a book about kangaroos, dingoes, or koalas. Why did you go into the African savanna or the African jungle?
Mainly because of my background, and that's what I know. I have been in Australia 25 years, but I relate a lot to the African animals. That's the one part of Zimbabwe and Africa that I miss, is the wildlife. I mean, the wildlife in Australia is fantastic as well, in a very different way. But I really miss that. And, I grew up in Mutare, which is a fairly small town on the eastern border of Zimbabwe, right on the border of Mozambique. And our family was basically like the fauna or the wires of what would be in an Australian town, because we didn't have any formal organizations like that. And we grew up, fortunately, my parents were very tolerant of myself, and particularly my older brother, but all three of us boys in the family loved our wildlife and our animals. And my dad and my mum did as well. But we were constantly just gathering animals. So I suppose this is why I got into stories and storytelling as well, because the story in my own head is of this wonderful, wonderful childhood. And I grew up going to school, playing sport in the backyard with my older brother Tony and my younger brother Simon, spending weekends and afternoons and hours out in the bush exploring the African wildlife, because our garden backed down onto a tract of bush. We could walk out for hours into the bush, and we did that. And we became, our home became this zoo of dogs, tame and wild birds, monkeys, baby antelope from time to time, tortoises, and a big concrete tank full of snakes. And the snakes, those were a real fascination, especially for my older brother, for Tony. He loved that. So I grew up in this menagerie. So the story in my head is of this wonderful, wonderful childhood. But the reason I'm telling you that and the reason that I'm talking about stories here is because that was the story in my head. In the background to all of that, I grew up right through what was then Rhodesia, because Zimbabwe used to be called Rhodesia, the Rhodesian Civil War, the war for independence, when the indigenous people of the country were fighting to get majority rule because it was a colonial country, ex-British colony, who had created the Unilateral Declaration of Independence in 1965, and that sparked a war. So they broke away from Britain and said, we're independent now, and it sparked a war that lasted for 15 years, right through my upbringing, from the time I was 5 until the time I was 20. And that war raged right through that whole time. So we being right on the border of Mozambique, which was where Robert Mugabe, the future president, had his main military bases. My school was only 600 meters from that border. We would often be sitting in class and we would hear landmines exploding in the minefield that had been set up to protect the town from direct invasion, because that minefield was only 600 meters from our school. So grew up with that. Mugabe's forces fired shots across our sports field when we were in training a couple of times. We had the teachers would rush us to cover in the rugby pavilion. I learned to fire a rifle and a pistol by the time I was 12 years old. So that if we were going out of town any great distance, I could literally ride shotgun with one of my parents. We were all conscripted into the army, every white male. Once you reached the age of 18 and left school, you were conscripted into military service. I was conscripted into my term of military service only about just over 6 months after my older brother had been killed. Tony had been killed on active service in his national service period. And I ended up getting posted to the same area and the same unit as he had lost his life in just a short while before. And yet, through all of that, I've still got the story in my head of this wonderful childhood. It's amazing. And I think part of the reason for that is that neuroscience research is showing us now that the way we live our lives and the reality we live out, we create our own reality. There is no one reality. We each create our own unique sense of reality, and it's entirely based on the stories and the associations that we create in our minds as we go through life. And we start doing this from the day we're born, basically. We start creating associations and we build up stories in our heads that tell us how the world is. Then, when we come up against a situation in the future, our subconscious mind draws back on those stories that we've subconsciously, again, implanted in our minds. We draw back on those stories and think, okay, in a similar situation, this is what happened before, so this is how I'm going to react now. So we see the world, we see reality from that perspective, from the perspective of the stories and the associations in our own minds. And because we've all had different stories and associations growing up, all of us, completely unique stories, none of us grow up exactly the same. We have a unique sense of reality. We don't see things the same way. Now, that creates a real problem for leadership, because how do you deal with situations, for example, in a workplace, in a business, where you're trying to lead a bunch of people, all of whom have a different understanding of reality? They all see the world differently. They see events differently. They see situations differently, and therefore they react and respond differently, because we're all individuals. We tend in our society to try and group people together and categorize people, and we have to do that to some extent. But in fact, we're all totally unique and we see the world from a different perspective. So, and that, I think, really, the reason I'm telling stories is because we know that stories are very, very powerful as ways of getting messages across. They're the most powerful way we can, because it creates images in our minds, and that's what we relate to best. But they're also really, really important, because that's what creates our sense of reality. So that's why I wanted to tell stories, and that's what underpins my belief in how we should be leaders in business, in the world, in our communities, in our families. The principles are exactly the same.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing that story. And obviously, sorry to hear about your brother, but I think
Thank
that whole process and that whole upbringing really gave you the perspective of what then helped you in the future to be able to deal with unknowns, because so many people go through life and the hardest thing they would ever experience is a broken nail or some late delivery from Amazon, whereas you had to fear and fend for your life. Every step that you would take during that 15 years of that war of liberation would have meant, either your life or the life of those that are around you. And evidenced by your brother not making it past, there would have been a lot of lessons throughout. But I'm glad you picked the best parts, which was the formidable years that you were learning how to become a man. But you soon went on, and when the war was over and everything else, you soon went on and you started your journey in advertising in Harare. Walk us through what that was like in a time when the country had just been
you.
formed, and you're literally laying the ground on a place where people still don't quite have a mind for peace, but yet you started something remarkable.
I think, Prosper, it was. I probably need to go back a little bit to answer that properly, and that is to say that what was really interesting when I look at it in hindsight, and very, very challenging at the time for me being conscripted into the army, was that I didn't want to do my national service. I didn't want to do that. My father was actually British. He was born in the UK. I'm third generation Zimbabwean on my mother's side, but my father was born in England. Grew up in India, but was born in England. Um, and he actually gave me an offer of an out and said, look, we can get you out the country if you would prefer not to do your national service. He had relatives over in the UK. He said that they're quite happy to look after you if you want to go across there. Um, but I knew that if I did that, I would potentially, I didn't know what was going to happen as the outcome of the war. I didn't know where it was going to end up. And I thought, well, potentially I might never be able to come back to the country of my birth. I would lose all my friends because you were very frowned upon as a white guy if you evaded national service. Um, so I did it. And I'm very, very glad I did, because what happened for me was I was posted to an all black unit, or almost all black unit, the vast majority indigenous people, um, who were mostly permanent force soldiers. They weren't conscripted at all. They were mostly permanent force soldiers. Um, but what that taught me is it made it clear to me why I hadn't really believed in what was going on in that war in the first place. And it had never been made clear to me because we had never, growing up, we'd never been allowed in a real sense to mingle with the indigenous people. That was frowned upon, which is terrible. We didn't even learn the language at school. It wasn't even on offer in my school. It wasn't even on offer, which is ridiculous. But living with those people, and when you're in a situation where your lives are depending on each other, you come to realize that we're all the same.
Mm.
There is no difference. That really, really came home to me. These were people just like anyone else. They were people like my friends, people like my parents. That's what they were. Sure, some different cultural issues, but that's irrelevant. I had friends with different cultural issues. One of my best friends at school was Italian, from a very Italian family. They were different too. So I realized that. Through that, I formed my, I suppose, my understanding that life is about humanity and life is about people and life is about showing empathy and it's about kindness. And that's become one of my real principles. So when I decided to get into the advertising industry, I was looking for a business to form in Harare. I'd worked in brand marketing, actually in South Africa, um, and thought there was a bit of an opening. I won't make the story too long, but I thought there was a bit of an opening in Zimbabwe to take some of the share of the market away from the big ad agencies, because there were basically at that point four big ad agencies, Young and Rubicam and what became Saatchi and Saatchi, and they're the big names, global names around the world. And I worked for Young and Rubicam for a year with the understanding, funnily enough, from the CEO of Zimbabwe's Young and Rubicam, a guy called Michael Hogg, who was a wonderful man. And he knew when I joined them that I wanted to form my own agency. And he supported that entirely and said, come and learn with us. You can make some. I'd just come back. I've been living in the UK for 3 years. And I'd just come back. And he said, well, you can make some connections. You can make some contacts. You can learn some things. And if you want to leave, give me 12 months and set up this division of our business for me. That's what he wanted. And if after 12 months you still want to leave and do your own thing, that's fine. I totally understand. But we'll have a gentleman's agreement. You won't steal any of my clients. So we shook hands on that, and a little bit over 12 months later, I did leave and formed an agency, literally from scratch with nothing. It was myself and a business partner who was the creative side of the agency, and we literally started from my back room at home with just the two of us, trying to find our first clients. We had none. We had no clients, not a lot of capital. And we just gradually managed to grow from there to a point where we were employing somewhere around 25 people. We had become a name in the advertising industry. And some of the bigger clients started to knock on our door. And that really sparked a change. We had to make a real decision. And anyone and I know this is a show for entrepreneurs and small to medium business owners, and you get to a point sometimes in a business where you have to make a huge call. And that happened to us the one day when we had what's now Rickert Benkaiser knock on our door. And the marketing director came to me. We only had small clients up to then. And there were only 4 of us in the ad agency. He literally walked into my office unannounced the one day, well, through the receptionist, but just turned up on our doorstep and said, we want to be treated like we're very important. In the big agencies, we've tried that and we don't get treated that way because we're a small client for them. We've only got a $1 million budget per annum. We want to bring it. We heard you're doing good work. We want to bring it all to you. Do you want it?
Wow.
And my business partner and I and Anthony Hardy, we had decided we were going to be a small boutique agency that looked after the small and medium-sized clients, and that's what we wanted. And we weren't doing this to drive ourselves to an early grave through overwork and stress and all that stuff. So we were going to stay small. This landed on our laps. So we had to make a real judgment call. What do we do? But we realized that it would be foolish to turn down an opportunity like that. So we took it and we ran with it. But then we had to grow. Because if we had one big client who had $1 million and our next biggest client had a budget of around about $250,000 and the others were mostly small bits and pieces here and there, we realized if we had $1 million client, we would be totally reliant on that client. And if they walked out the door and we had geared up to service them, we were in trouble. So we then had to go and find more bigger clients, which we were fortunate enough to be able to do, and the agency grew, and we never got huge, didn't want to, but we got to a point where we had 25 staff. Now, to cut a long story short, the story out of that didn't strike me at the time, but that I realized after we had moved to Australia, I realized about 6 or 7 years after we had moved here, I was trying to figure out, and I was working for another ad agency at the time here. But I was quite unhappy. I was commuting from Port Macquarie, where I live, about a 6-hour drive to Sydney every week. I had young kids who I was missing growing up during the week. I was exhausted at weekends. My wife was frazzled trying to run her own business and bring up the kids during the week and all this stuff. And I was trying to figure out what on earth was going on. And I realized that what had made our agency in Zimbabwe really great wasn't me. I'm not a brilliant ad man. I'm not. I was okay as a brand marketer. I was all right. But I'm not your quintessential ad man. That's not my strength. I'm not a graphic artist. I'm not a designer. I'm not really a copywriter. I can do brand strategy work. I'm good at that. So I thought, well, why was that agency a success? What made it a success? Because we were not wildly creative. We did good, solid creative work. We hung our hat on customer service and things like that for our clients. But what really struck me when I sat and I was thinking about this halfway back on the drive, because I'd fallen asleep on the drive and nearly crashed my car, literally. I woke, fortunately, and my car veered over to the left when I fell asleep onto the gravel shoulder, and I woke up as I hit the gravel shoulder and managed to get the car under control. If I drifted the other way, I'd have gone into oncoming traffic. This was about 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. I was exhausted. And I sat there for about half an hour thinking this through. And I realized when I got to that point, I realized what had made the agency great was our people. It was our people. It wasn't me. It wasn't even Ant, and Ant would admit this. It wasn't even Ant, our creative director. He was very good at putting the creative team together. I was good at pulling the team together. But what had made it work was that we employed the right people and we created an environment for them in which they could thrive and they could become the best versions of themselves, both in terms of their professionalism, in terms of how they approach their work, but also as individuals. We made it a place where they wanted to come to. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of in that period was the fact that in my 7 years with that agency before we immigrated to Australia, not a single one of our staff members resigned. Not one.
Right. So
Actually, that's not quite true. One did. My own PA resigned, but 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 she left to have a child. She thought she wouldn't want to come back to work, but a year later she came back anyway. So she came back and rejoined us. So not one person resigned, and that's what really struck me. And I realized that is what a business is about. A business is its people. It is its people. Without its people, what's the point? It can't succeed. It cannot succeed without good people. They who deliver everything. They're the ones who deliver it. That was the learning.
Now, John, it is, and thank you so much for taking us through that, because I know you'll concur with this. It is a gift to be allowed by people to lead them. And you not only did it in the wartime, you also went and did it in the peacetime. And then that takes a certain kind of person, because it's either or. Some people are really good as peacetime leaders when things are all right. You know, when Amazon is delivering on time, people are happy and it's easy to motivate people when things are right. But also, you did it in the wartime. And as you elaborated, the people that you were leading, right, were the indigenous people, of which, for people that are not quite understanding, the people that were meant to be, against are their own kind. So it takes a level of leadership to rally someone to be against their own. And obviously, if you really look at all of those things, I think that's why you are well positioned to be obviously talking about this in terms of, how people can actually be leaders. Now, maybe in your own words, because I read somewhere, and I'm going to say this with utmost love and respect, your mom, Jean Carroll, mentioned that leadership is about serving. And it looks like what you then went on and did was fulfill that. Maybe you can comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Prosper. Yes, that my mum and my dad, but in this particular respect, my mum was a very big influence on me. She was a hugely respected teacher and deputy principal of a girls' high school, the Mutare Girls, Mutare was then Mutare, but now Mutare Girls High School in Mutare, a very respected teacher and school leader. And I can remember coming back from university, I was doing a degree in psychology and business administration. And I got back from university and I was actually doing my postgraduate honors year, and I was having to write a thesis. And I decided to write my thesis on what made some people successful managers in business and other people not so much. And I remember asking my mum when I came back, I was standing in the kitchen helping her with preparing the meal or whatever it was. And I asked her what she thought a leader was. And she thought for a minute and she said, a leader is one who is willing to serve. And that really struck me. It really stuck with me. And I thought, wow, I had never thought of it like that. You know, you traditionally you're taught that a leader is someone who gives directions and should be followed and all of that. You know, that's their job. And in the army, to go back to that, that's what we were taught on the officers' course. That's what we were taught. That's what you do. You know, I ended up as a sergeant. I wasn't a commissioned officer, and I'm very grateful for that, because that again, that's what got me out into the bush with these people I was with, which was the biggest learning experience I could have in my life, probably. But you know, you have to, in the army, you've sometimes got to just give orders and expect them to be followed, because people's lives depend on it. And as you say, especially leading in a unit like that, where you've got people who, to all intents and purposes, they're fighting against their own culture in a sense, and they're fighting against what should be good for them, which was majority rule and true democracy. I'm not going to go into the detail of what that was about, but yes, that was fairly difficult. But I came to one of the realizations, and again, I've thought about this afterwards and realized why and how I came to those realizations. And that was that even in that situation, there are ways you can give orders to people without being overbearing, without being obnoxious, without being arrogant. And if you can learn to do that and to lead people and for them to follow your instructions because they want to, because they trust you, because they respect you, that is what makes the difference. So one of the key principles that comes out of the leaders to the lion fable in the book we were talking about earlier is that what I call a self-led leader is kind even when they have to be tough. And I think you can be. You know, we all, as leaders in business, you get into situations sometimes where you have to reprimand people, you have to have tough conversations, you have to fire people sometimes. Fortunately, I've only had to do that a few times. I've had to make a number of people redundant, and that's not pleasant either. But the point is, you can do that without being horrible, without demeaning someone. For example, if you're having to fire someone, you don't have to demean them. You can be disappointed, you can be angry, and that's fine. But don't run them down. Don't make them feel small. Tell them why you're having to fire them. Let them know in no uncertain terms if you want to, but respect them as an individual. Because if you don't, they're going to go away from that conversation thinking, I hate that guy. I hate this organization. I'm glad I'm out. Whereas if they go away feeling, oh, he's right. He had no choice but to fire me. But that person's kept their self-respect to a large extent, then they're not going to do that. They're not going to go away and trash you out in the environment. And they will hopefully learn and grow from that. So I think that whole concept of kindness, that underpins everything I stand for. And it stems right back to that conversation with my mum, that a leader is one who is willing to serve. You're there to serve other people, to help them, to guide them, to support them. That's your job.
Absolutely. I viscerally believe that we're here to leave, to learn, and to contribute. And that's exactly what it is. So you lived that life where, you know, you've got both sides of the coin, the happy stuff, the war stuff, and then you went on and built a business and things of that nature. But through all of that, you had to learn how to connect with other people, how to connect with nature, how to actually connect with business and, you know, capitalism, all in a space of, you know, your lifestyle. And now you're sending the elevator down, you know, in your way of contribution. First of all, I just thought I'd ask you this. I mean, obviously, Jean is second generation, you know, Rhodesian. If by any chance she will probably be with us today, what would she think about the work that you're doing today?
I hope she would be very proud of it. I think she would. I think a lot of, and I actually use her as an example, and examples from what she told me, you know, even when I was at school, about how she was guiding some of the students in the school and things like that, you know. She probably shouldn't have told me all those stories, but she did. And so I learned an enormous amount from her, and I think, yeah, I hope she would be proud of me, and I hope I'm doing her proud in the work I'm trying to do now, in instilling a lot of the learnings that I got a lot from her, as I said, from my dad as well, but a lot from my mum. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you were 12, you were riding shotgun, in a van or in a truck, and you never knew what was coming in front, and you had literally a shotgun with you there. But now you're riding shotgun, speaking and training a lot of people who have not been exposed to any of these concepts. You're literally breaking new ground to really, unique cultures, and setting the stage for what your concept of leadership is, which I think the whole world should be looking at. So tell us a little bit about your speaking and training work, which you're doing, and why other businesses should literally consider engaging with the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Prosper. Yeah, look, let me say first that the whole concept of the leader as a servant isn't necessarily new. Ken Blanchard has taught that about servant leadership for quite a long time, and other people have as well. So it's not a totally unique concept. But what I'm trying to bring to it is, I think, another level of that concept of being a servant. It's more than just being of service to the people who, in a business, for example, report to you. It's more than that. It goes to an understanding of humanity and an understanding of nature. I've just got this huge innate belief that we are all part of one thing here. We're all part of one universe. We're all part of this earth that we live in, and beyond that. And therefore, we should be looking after each other. We should be looking after nature. We should be looking after wildlife. We should be looking after other people, other cultures. That's what it's about. The whole concept of Ubuntu, which you will know about. I love that principle. It is so good. Maybe I should explain that very quickly before we carry on. But some people will have heard of Ubuntu. It's becoming more known now. And you will know this better than me because you were brought up in the culture. I had to learn it outside of that, sadly, because it should be taught in every culture. But Ubuntu is very difficult to translate into English, but essentially it means I am me because we are we. So I would not be who I am without all of you, and without all of this, and without all of nature, and without this universe that's around me, without this situation, without this environment, I would not be me. But also, all of you, my community, beyond that, nature, the universe would not be the same without me, because we're all contributing something in some way, in a unique way. And that's what the spirit of Ubuntu is. And that's how I think we need to approach leadership. It's from that perspective. Every person has something to contribute, and it's a matter of, as a leader, of finding out what that is, and bringing that out in your people. So what I've developed in what's now my business is I've created a series through the fables we're talking about that are now in the book. I use those fables and other fables as well, but mainly those ones. And I've created a series of keynote presentations that I do at conferences. So they can be anything from, I've had to do one in 15 minutes once, that's all we were given. So I've had to condense it down into 15 minutes, which was interesting. But through to half an hour, through to a full hour session, if that's what's wanted, and depends on how long you've got in that conference. And I'll deliver one of those fables and depending on the timing, unpack the leadership principles around that fable. Each of those fables and each of those keynote presentations can then break out into a workshop, which most of them are half-day workshops. They can be combined together in a series, or they can stand alone because each of them is on a specific topic, from the concept of the principles of self-led leadership through to self-leadership, through to team building, through to corporate culture and employee engagement, through to change, communication, all of those things. So they go into workshops as well. What I've also developed more recently, because I think we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but one of the biggest issues, aside from needing better leadership in organizations, I believe one of the biggest issues we're facing is this issue of change, and we're always hearing it. There's ongoing change. It's never ending, and it's so fast. It's so rapid. How do we keep pace? So I've developed a whole program that can run for up to 12 months where I'll work with organizations to really embed the principles of change leadership into that organization from the grassroots up, because you can't just work with the leaders for something like this. You've got to work with the general staff, everyone from the cleaners up to the CEO and the board of directors potentially. Everyone should be on board and on the same path. Because then, if you're living this and breathing this, you can create a truly adaptive organization that copes, that is resilient, that can cope with that ongoing change and that pace of change. I just think that's so important. So I've added that on as well. So I've got a range of things I can do, and it depends on what the client wants and what they're looking for and where they're at in their journey and all that stuff. And I love chatting to people about that anyway. And I'm happy to do that with anyone if they want to contact me. I'll have a chat. There's no obligation. They don't have to contract me, but I'm happy to help if I can.
Fantastic. Now, indulge me if you can here, John, a little bit, because you did obviously allude a little bit to the Ubuntu sort of philosophy and how I am because you are is pivotal in the way people actually live. You see, when we were growing up, and maybe you would have done this, but without the actual stages that I'm talking about. At 12, you were literally given a gun, and you had to protect the family. And at a certain age, you then had to be inscripted into the army and things of that nature for you to, fight for a cause and believe in something. All right. So that in and of itself, if you would allow me to call it a rite of passage, like a pattern break in your life, which then led you to learn all of these things, which then led you to understand the actual human being that you were working with, because the guys behind you would literally point the gun at you, but they were not. All right. So that's a level of understanding and trust that you needed to build with those people. And only that can happen when people really embody Ubuntu, because I am here because you are, all right? And I viscerally believe what you've created and what you're creating and what you're introducing into this world as somewhat of a rite of passage, even if it's in how many pages? I think maybe 101 pages, 100 to be exact. In 100 pages or in 12 months in the courses that you're taking people through, you are literally presenting a pattern break, because in the first world, people just grow up, go to school, go to high school, don't even have to face a lot of tragedy. Maybe the one thing they might face is, not being accepted in college or being rejected by a girl. And oh my God, they have to go and see, and I'm saying this with utmost love and respect, they have not had to experience what you went through or what you go through. So these people are then the leaders in some companies. So we have fully grown babies that are leading teams and haven't had to experience a lot of this stuff. And what you are presenting is somewhat of a rite of passage that will then, put them on to the path of what leadership should look like. I don't know. Maybe you can comment on that, because that's what I discovered on this. If that's not the case, like I told you, I think I'm going to be using this for my kids, just to ground them a little bit, to tell them, yeah, there's lions, yeah, there's riders. I don't know. You can comment on that a little bit, and then you can let us know that those that are uninitiated, where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Prosper. I have to say, I'm so grateful for the journey I've had in life. I've been so lucky. I really have been lucky. Growing up in the family I grew up in, as I said, even experiencing the war and all of that, while I now am very much a peacemaker and I'm not a fan of war at all, not at all. I'm very grateful for the lessons that forced me to learn. I think one of the hardest things we can do in life is to make major changes. It's really, really difficult. But one of the things you realize when you grow up through that sort of situation, a wartime situation, is that we're all much more resilient than we think we are. We can cope with so much more than we believe. But until we're put in that situation, we don't try. We just don't try. So, because there's no need to. Why mix things up? Why make things hard if they're not hard? Why would we do that? So we don't. And that's totally understandable. But it means when a difficult situation does arrive, it's more difficult to handle it. However, let's talk businesses and organizations here. If you're in your business and you have led from a spirit of empathy, from a spirit of kindness, from a spirit of Ubuntu, and you get into a difficult situation, you will know that you can trust your people and they will trust you to sit down and find a way through it. You're not having to do this alone. You don't have to solve the problem alone. There are others around you and you trust each other. And that makes an enormous difference in a business. It really, really does. I think that's one of the pivotal things that happens in businesses that develop this sort of thing. And it's interesting because you're talking about this being a change and breaking the mold and breaking the pattern and all of that. And I hugely believe it needs to be broken. If you look at what's happening out there in the business world, look at the surveys. For example, Gallup do their State of the Global Workplace report every year. You look at the results from that, and the people who are just disengaged in the workplace, the vast majority of people are disengaged. They don't want to be at work. Look at the trouble organizations are having attracting, recruiting talent, staff, and then holding on to them. They're really struggling. I think the average length of stay for a person under the age of 30 is 2 years or something in an organization, because they get in and they move on. That's a problem. That's a real problem. But one of the reasons is because the world has changed. Young people have changed. COVID, this was happening anyway, pre-COVID, but COVID really exaggerated the pace of that change. It just exponentially increased. And if you look at what young people and people in general now are looking for in work, they don't want to work in a job where they're treated like a cog in the wheel, where they're kept like a mushroom and just in the dark and just they're fed, excuse the language, but they're fed crap and told to grow. They don't want that. People don't want that. They want to be respected. They want to be trusted. They want to feel that they're doing something meaningful and contributing to this world of ours. And so we need to do that in our organizations to create those sort of environments, because if we don't, we're going to continue to struggle to attract talent. We're going to continue to struggle to keep talent when we get it. It's so, so critical. The world has changed and we have to change with it.
Absolutely. And how can our viewers connect with you and learn more about your work and possibly embark on their own leadership safari?
Sure. So they can go to my website, which is leadershipsafaris with an s.com.au. So leadershipsafaris.com.au. And the information's all up there. I'm more than happy to take emails from people. They can email me directly at John, John, at leadershipsafaris.com.au. Again, don't forget the S on safaris, plural. So John at leadershipsafaris.com.au. They're more than welcome to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for John Carroll Talk. John Carroll, Talk, John Carroll Talk, and I should pop up. Or John Carroll Leadership Safaris, and I should pop up. They can connect with me there. I'm on Facebook under a similar handle. And I love connecting with people and hearing from people on this stuff, because I think we're all on this journey of learning, and I learn so much from other people all the time. And the only way I can do that is by talking to them and connecting with people and hearing their stories and the battles they're going to and how they've resolved issues. That's what's so important. So I'm more than happy for people to reach out. Love it.
Absolutely. I'll make sure.
Thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Oh, fantastic. I will make sure that all those links are in the show notes below, and people can definitely utilize them and, yes, get started on this journey. Now, you alluded to the Gallup State of Global Workplace 2022 report in your book here, and then you say that it was a survey across 160 countries, and it found that only 21% of employees globally are engaged in their work. Now, this presents such a big dilemma for leaders out there, because if 21% and if the rest, what's the rest? I can't do maths.
79% are not engaged. But
70,
I think something like 17% of the rest
yeah.
are actively disengaged, which means they are actively and consciously working against the best interests of the organization.
Wow.
That's
Fantastic. So you've got the 80-20 rule pretty much working here, the Pareto principle.
yeah.
And let's just go with the 80%, right? That literally are just coming in maybe for a paycheck or just because something better hasn't showed up. Now, we're also faced with a situation where these leaders are talking to people they have literally been telling for the past 2 years that they're non-essential, they're not needed. And these people are also thinking to themselves that nobody needed what I'm doing right now. And as a human being, yes, you do talk about the paradoxes of that. One of the biggest values and need of a human being is to contribute. And if you're showing up at a job that nobody needs and doesn't care for, that would present a big, shift in your head that whatever I'm doing, even if I push these papers, nobody's going to need it. It's not going to count to nothing. Now, in your experience, you've led people that literally could have turned around you at any given moment, but you still went through, and we're here today together talking. What sort of advice would you give to future leaders out there who are being faced with people that are coming to work and obviously, like you say, they're not engaged, but simply because they know that what they're doing is not needed?
Yeah, that can be such a difficult situation in organizations. And I think point one is, if that person is genuinely not needed, why are they in that job? Does that job even exist? And you need to think about that in your organization. But before you just go and sack all those people and dismiss them or make them redundant or whatever it is, think about how can we reposition this person so we can use them to the best advantage. Or not use them, that's a bad term, but to take advantage of what they have to offer. And I think one of the key things that we overlook in business very often as well is and again, it's one of the principles that I try and teach, and that is to work with people's strengths, to focus on their strengths, not on their weaknesses. So what we should be doing in our teams, it doesn't matter what the team is looking for people's strengths. And you can go and do various tests. Gallup, again, I've got one called the Clifton Strengths Test. It is brilliant. And it tells you where people are strong and where they're not so strong. It's not a personality test. It's not that. It tells them what their natural innate talents are and what they're not so naturally gifted at. But if you can do that in your team and build a team around you where you're really using people to the best of their talents and saying, okay, well, that's your strength. Work with that strength. I want you to take that and run with it and let them create something for themselves. Then that can make a big difference. I'm a huge believer, and I know this can't work in every role, and I'm not naive enough to think it can. But what I've tried to do in the organizations I've led, and especially more recent role as a CEO, one of the things we said to people is, if you don't believe we're using you to the best of your talents and your abilities, please come and speak to us. And let's see if we can work something out. We can't guarantee that we will be able to, but I promise you we will try. And we had a number of people that happened to, where they came to us and said, look, I'm doing this particular job. One was an example of a lady, I'm not going to mention names, but she was a lady who was managing a team of supervisors, of 4 other supervisors. They didn't like her, she didn't like them, it wasn't working, it was dysfunctional. She came and said, I am not a people manager. I don't like doing that role. I'm not good at it, and it's clearly not working. This is what I'm good at. I'm very good at creating processes, creating systems, doing that sort of thing. And we realized that we were working in a not-for-profit organization, the Age and Disability Services sector. We just had a whole lot of government change imposed on us. We were about to get audited to retain our funding from the government. And we realized there was a significant role that this lady could be really good at. So we repositioned her and put her into that role. And she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. and turned around that aspect of our organization. So my comment would be, try and use people to their strengths. Try and create a team around you of people whose strengths complement your own. So where you're not so strong, they are strong. And be prepared to share that with your team. Discuss it among you. I'm not good at this. You are good at this. So I need you in my team to do that aspect of it and to help with that aspect. And then as much as possible, let them create their own role within that. Tell them what outcomes you want. That's fine. But then let them create it for themselves, because then they take ownership of it, and then they want to come to work and they want to do it. Does that answer the question?
I absolutely love that. It's literally, encapsulating your statement: lead people and manage processes. Because if you manage the processes, everything else will take care of itself. Now, obviously, John, you've taken us on a journey. Oh, should I say you've taken us on a safari? And we've experienced, what it was like, before you embarked on your journey and what you're working on now. Now you've left us wondering what's next. What can people expect on this safari? I think we've seen all the big five. What's on the horizon now?
Okay, so a couple of things for me. One is I'm just starting and getting into the process of transitioning to a lot of video work.
Right.
So I want to start producing the fables, for example, on video as a storytelling exercise on video. And some of those will be available free. So I'm working on that, and I want to develop that. I'm constantly looking, I'm really working on trying to do that change management program, which is a much longer form program, rather than just doing the half-day workshops and the keynote presentations. I love doing those, but I felt I needed something that would really implement things better. So that's a bit of a focus for me at the moment. But in the background to all that, I love the writing process, hence the book, and hence the fables and all of that. So I'm currently working on a novel as well. But this novel is going to be an overnight success, because I've only been working on it for about 27 years. So
you still have that Zimbabwean humor, right?
No, it's a novel. Again, it's tied into what I do. So it's about poaching in Africa, set in Zimbabwe, set in the Zambezi Valley. And it's a novel about a young English doctor, based on my experience living in England, who comes out there to get away from a divorce and just wants a total change, and comes out there and starts running a clinic in a remote village, and gets embroiled in this whole poaching gang. And it's, how does he get out of that situation? There's a love interest, of course, and all of that stuff. But it's around that. It's a thriller, basically. So I'm really enjoying writing that. But that's I write that as and when I can. That's my second job, really, is writing that.
But
so I'm having a lot of fun.
fantastic. Well, be sure to let us know when those videos come around, because I think the next generation would just enjoy the story aspect to it, but also learn the things that you are imparting on us. Well, John, I can't thank you enough. Tatenda Shikuru for all this time that you spent with me. I've just noticed we are almost running out of tape. So we might as well just conclude this a little bit, because I know you and I could talk for ages. And there's so much that we can dive into, but I really appreciate the time that you spent with us today, man.
Only my pleasure, Prosper, and Tatenda Sekuru, Tatenda Shamwari, I hope I can say that, and Shamwari's friend. And I've really appreciated the opportunity, and I've loved chatting with you. And yeah, I wish we could talk forever, because you're a fascinating man to talk to as well. So thank you.
Oh, well, absolutely, absolutely. Well, that was a safari filled with insights, laughter, and inspiration. And with any safari, we now have to pack up. And when you pack up a safari truck, you close all the sides, and then you just hit home. Any animals that you see on the way, well, those were not part of the package.
I love it.
That if you want to embark on your own leadership safari and unlock secrets to building thriving dreams, be sure to reach out to John Carroll. I will make sure that all those links that he's mentioned are in the show notes below, and be sure to grab this book, ladies and gentlemen. I just can't put it down. You can see I've marked it and everything else, but it's also not just a book that was gifted to me. And thank you so much for the personal touch there, John. But I'm actually gonna on pass this to the kids, and I can't wait for the videos, because I think they will actually be able to translate all of these messages in a very succinct way. So for those that are watching, don't miss out the opportunity to maybe rewatch this episode again, or send it to your leader. All right. Anybody who's in a leadership position, that could be your dad, your mom, your brother, your sister, the guys you work with at work, or the person that you report to at work. We are all in somewhat of a leadership position, and we all need to learn how to be, do, and have a happier existence, and also make sure that those that we are looking after are also enjoying the ride. Okay, so be sure to either watch this episode again or subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show for more transformative conversations like these. Right, it's a safari that you don't have to pay a ticket for, so it's one of those things that you never will come across anywhere else. Well, until next time, John, thank you so much once again. And for those that are watching up until now, I know it's been a long one, but I think it is well worth it. Stay prosperous, stay inspired, and be good leaders out there. Bye for now.